The smile you've been hiding. When was the last time someone asked you how you were doing and you actually told the truth? Think about that. Not the polished version, not the "I am fine" that rolls off the tongue before the question even finishes. The real answer. The one sitting quietly behind your eyes every single morning when you look in the mirror. There is a man. He wakes up every day, makes his coffee, laughs at his phone, talks to people, nods, smiles, and then at night, when the room goes quiet and the lights go off, he stares at the ceiling and wonders why nothing feels enough. He is not broken. He is not depressed. He is just carrying something he never learned how to put down. Welcome to Wisdom Woven. This channel exists for one reason only: to give you the kind of wisdom that does not just sound good, but actually changes something in you. If this is your first time here, you are in the right place at the right time. Like this video, share it with someone who needs it, subscribe so you never miss what is coming next, and drop a comment below telling us when you last smiled without any reason at all. That one comment could remind a stranger that joy is still possible. That is how this message travels. That is how lives quietly change. Now back to that man staring at the ceiling. He is not alone. He is everywhere. He is in offices, in families, in temples, in quiet apartments across every city in the world. And Buddhism noticed this long before modern psychology gave it a name. Over 2,500 years ago, a prince sat under a tree and refused to move until he understood why human beings suffer. Not just the big dramatic suffering, not just war and loss and grief, but that quiet daily ache, the one that hides behind a functioning life. What he discovered was not dark, it was not heavy, it was actually almost shockingly simple. And yet most people never hear it in a way that lands, because it keeps getting wrapped in robes and rituals and language that feels distant from Tuesday morning. The Buddha said something that sounds almost too plain. He said that suffering does not come from what happens to you, it comes from your relationship with what happens to you. Read that again slowly. Your suffering is not the event. It is the grip you have on the event. It is the story you keep replaying. It is the version of the moment that you refuse to release even after the moment is already gone. And the smile? That real one, the one that doesn't need a reason, that one gets buried under the weight of all those stories, layer by layer, year by year, until one day someone asks you how you are and you do not even pause before lying. Buddhism does not ask you to be happy all the time. That would be its own kind of suffering. It asks something far more honest. It asks you to stop pretending that the weight is not there and start understanding where it actually comes from. There is a concept in Buddhist teaching called dukkha. Most people translate it as suffering, but that translation misses something important. Dukkha is closer to a wheel that is slightly off its axle. Everything still moves, everything still functions, but there's this constant grinding, this low vibration of wrongness underneath even the good moments. That grinding is what steals the smile. Not the big events, the grinding. And here's what nobody tells you. The grinding does not stop by fixing the outside. A better job does not stop the grinding. A better relationship does not stop the grinding. More money certainly does not stop the grinding. The grinding stops only when you look at the axle itself. This video is about that axle. This is not motivation. This is not a list of tips. This is something older and quieter and far more powerful than anything trending right now. Because the Buddha also said this. He said the smile is not something you find, it is something you uncover. It was never taken from you, it was buried, and everything that buried it can be moved. Most people spend their entire lives redecorating the outside of a house that is shaking from the foundation. They change the curtains, they paint the walls, they invite people over, and the shaking continues. What you are about to understand across this video is not a philosophy, it is a mirror. And mirrors do not lie, they do not comfort, but they do something that comfort never can. They show you exactly where to begin. The smile you've been hiding, it is not gone, it is just waiting, and it has been patient for a very long time. Why life keeps stealing your smile? Nobody wakes up one day and decides to stop smiling. It does not happen like that. It never happens like that. It is not a moment. It is a slow erosion, like water wearing down stone. You do not see it happening. You only notice it one morning when you reach for something that used to be there and find that your hand closes around nothing. Think about a child, any child. Watch one for 5 minutes. They laugh at shadows. They find joy in a cardboard box. They cry hard and then forget completely. They do not carry yesterday into today. They do not borrow trouble from tomorrow. They are just here, fully and completely here, and that presence is exactly where the smile lives. Then something happens. Actually, many things happen. Small things, mostly. A teacher says something sharp. A parent is too busy. A friendship ends badly. A hope quietly dies. And the child learns something. They learn that the world is not always safe for their full self. So they begin to edit. They tuck parts of themselves away. They learn to read the room before they feel the feeling. That is not weakness, that is survival. But survival and joy cannot always live in the same house. Buddhism calls this the beginning of the conditioned self, the version of you that was built by experience rather than born from truth. Layer by layer, this conditioned self grows thicker, and somewhere underneath all those layers, the original self, the one that laughed at shadows, waits quietly. Here is where it gets interesting. The world does not steal your smile with cruelty alone. Sometimes it steals it with success. That sounds strange, but think about it. A person chases a goal for years, works hard, sacrifices, finally gets it, and then stands in the middle of everything they wanted and feels almost nothing. Or worse, feels a strange, hollow anxiety, because now the question becomes, what next? And the smile that was supposed to arrive with the achievement simply does not show up. The Buddha had a word for this trap. He called it tanha. It is usually translated as craving or desire, but it is more specific than that. It is the belief that something outside of you will finally make you whole. It is the endless reaching. And the tragedy of tanha is not that it feels bad. The tragedy is that sometimes it feels incredibly good, right until the moment it does not. Every advertisement ever made is built on tanha. Every scroll through a phone at midnight is powered by tanha. Every time a person says, "I will be happy when," that is tanha speaking. And it is one of the most effective smile thieves in human history. But there is another thief, quieter and more personal. Buddhism calls it aversion, the constant pushing away of discomfort, the refusal to sit with anything that feels unpleasant. And here is the cruel irony. The more aggressively a person avoids discomfort, the more powerful that discomfort becomes. The mind amplifies what it refuses to face. A person who cannot sit with loneliness will do almost anything to avoid being alone. And in doing so, they will build a life full of noise and company and still feel lonely in every room they enter, because they never faced the thing. They just kept running from it. The smile does not live in the running. It never did. There is also the thief that nobody talks about honestly, and that is comparison. The Buddha lived before social media, but he understood comparison deeply. He saw it destroy communities and practitioners and even kings. The mind that measures itself against others is a mind permanently at war, because there will always be someone with more, with better, with easier. And the moment you step onto that measuring scale, you have already lost something that cannot be bought back. What comparison does to the smile is almost surgical. It doesn't just reduce joy, It poisons the joy that is already there. A person can receive something genuinely beautiful in their life, and comparison will make them feel that it is not enough, that they do not deserve to fully celebrate it, that someone somewhere has it better. And then there is time, the thief that nobody escapes, not through wisdom or wealth or spiritual practice. Buddhism is perhaps more honest about time than any other tradition. The concept of anicca, impermanence, sits at the very center of Buddhist philosophy. Everything changes, everything passes, nothing stays. And the suffering that comes from this changing is not from the changing itself, it is from the refusal to accept the changing. People fall in love and immediately fear losing what they have found. They hold their children and already dread the day those children leave. They taste joy, and the tasting is already shadowed by the knowing that it will end. And so even in the beautiful moments, there is this faint grief running underneath.
That is anicca, working against an unprepared mind, against a mind that has not yet learned how to hold things lightly. So here is the picture that Buddhism paints, and paints honestly. Life as most people live it is structured in a way that works directly against the smile. Not because the world is evil, not because people are weak, but because nobody teaches the operating system. Nobody explains that the mind has default settings, and those default settings are not designed for joy. They are designed for survival. Craving pulls forward, aversion pushes away, comparison measures constantly. Time threatens everything, and the smile, that effortless original smile, gets smaller and smaller with each passing year until most people cannot even remember what it felt like to have it for no reason at all. But here is the thing about thieves. Once you can see them clearly, they lose most of their power. You cannot stop what you cannot name. But when you can look a thief in the face and say, "I see you," something shifts. Not everything, not immediately, but something real and quiet shifts. And that shift is where this story is going. What Buddha said about suffering and joy. There is a story that almost never gets told in the way it deserves. A young woman loses her only child. She is devastated in a way that language cannot properly hold. She goes to the Buddha carrying her dead child in her arms, and she begs him to bring the boy back. And the Buddha does not turn her away. He does not lecture her. He does not hand her a philosophy. He looks at her with complete steadiness and says, "Bring me a mustard seed from any home in this village that has never known grief, and I will do what you ask." She goes door to door, house to house, and at every single door she finds the same thing: loss, death, heartbreak. Grief in different shapes, but grief everywhere. By the end of the day, she has no mustard seed, but she has something more valuable. She has the understanding that suffering is not a punishment. It is not a mistake. It is not evidence that something has gone wrong with her life specifically. It is the shared texture of being human. And that understanding, strange as it sounds, gave her peace. Not happiness, peace. And Buddhism will always choose peace over happiness, because happiness is weather and peace is ground. Most people have heard that Buddhism teaches life is suffering. They hear that and they put it down immediately. Who wants a philosophy that starts with suffering? But that translation is doing something unfair to the original. The actual teaching is far more precise and far more hopeful than a simple declaration that life is pain. The Buddha organized his entire teaching around what are called the Four Noble Truths, and the first truth does acknowledge suffering. But the second truth says something remarkable. It says suffering has a cause, not a mysterious cosmic cause, not a punishment from above, a specific, traceable psychological cause that lives inside the human mind. That is not a pessimistic statement. That is one of the most optimistic things ever said. Because if suffering has a cause, that it also has an end. Think about that distinction carefully. A world where suffering is random is a world where a person is helpless. But a world where suffering follows a specific mechanism is a world where a person has agency. The Buddha was not handing humanity a sentence, he was handing humanity a map. The third noble truth says that the end of suffering is possible, not after death, not in some other life, now, in this body, in this mind, in this ordinary, complicated, imperfect life. The Buddha himself was the evidence, a man who sat with everything and found the other side. And the fourth noble truth gives the path, not a leap of faith, not a miracle, a path, something that can be walked step by an ordinary person with an ordinary amount of courage and an ordinary amount of courage. Now here is where most people misunderstand Buddhism on joy. They assume that because Buddhism talks so much about suffering, it must be suspicious of happiness, that it must want its practitioners to be serious and subdued and somehow above pleasure. That is completely wrong. The Buddha laughed often. His close disciples described him as someone whose presence made people feel lighter. There are records of him joking with monks, teasing students gently, sitting in complete ease. He was not a man who renounced joy. He was a man who understood joy so thoroughly that he stopped confusing it with pleasure. And that distinction between joy and pleasure is perhaps the most important thing Buddhism has to offer a modern mind drowning in stimulation.
Pleasure is external. It arrives through the senses. It peaks and then it fades. And when it fades, there is always a small withdrawal, a small hunger for more. Pleasure is not evil in Buddhist thought. It is simply unreliable as a foundation for a life. You cannot build anything lasting on something that is designed to fade. Joy is different in kind, not just in degree. Joy in Buddhist understanding is not the opposite of sadness. It is not a feeling that comes from something good happening. It is a quality of awareness. It is what remains when the mind stops fighting with reality. It is the natural state of a consciousness that is no longer at war with itself. The Pali word for this is mudita. It is often translated as sympathetic joy or appreciative joy, but at its root, it is simply the capacity to be genuinely glad, not performing gladness, not manufacturing it, actually accessing it because the obstructions have been removed. A blocked pipe does not need water added to it, it needs the blockage removed. The water was always there. That is exactly the Buddhist view of joy. It is not something to be achieved, it is something to be uncovered by removing what is covering it. The Buddha also said something that cuts directly against the grain of how most modern people approach their emotional lives. He said that a mind that clings to pleasant experiences and resists unpleasant ones is a mind that will never find stillness. Not because pleasure is wrong, but because the clinging itself creates turbulence, and turbulence is the enemy of joy. Imagine holding water in your hands. If you cup them gently, the water rests. The moment you grip tightly, trying to keep it, the water pushes through your fingers and is gone. The smile is exactly like that. The harder a person tries to hold on to happiness, the faster it escapes. The Buddhist invitation is to open the hands, not to stop caring, but to stop gripping. What Buddha said about suffering and joy is ultimately this: they are not opposites, they are not enemies, they are two ends of the same thread. And the person who is willing to follow that thread honestly, without flinching, without skipping the uncomfortable parts, without demanding that the journey look a certain way, that person arrives somewhere that most people never even knew existed. Not a place without pain, not a life without difficulty, but a depth of inner quiet that makes even the hard days something you can stand in without breaking. A smile that does not depend on circumstances, a smile that has roots instead of wings. That is what was found under that tree 2,500 years ago, and it is still there, waiting for whoever is patient enough to look. The mind that smiles even in pain. There is a monk in a small room with nothing but a mat, a bowl, and a window. Outside that window, the world is loud and complicated and moving at a speed that exhausts most people just watching it. Inside the room, the monk is completely still, not because nothing is happening in his life, not because he has been spared difficulty. He has lost people, he has known hunger, he has sat with fear. But right now, in this moment, his face carries something that stops people when they see it. Not a grin, not performed contentment, something quieter and far more real, something that looks almost unreasonably calm for a human being. Most people look at that image and assume it requires renunciation, that to have that kind of peace, you must give up everything: the apartment, the career, the complicated relationships, the phone, all of it. And that assumption is one of the most convenient excuses the mind has ever invented for not doing the actual work. Because the Buddha specifically taught householders, ordinary people with families and debts and neighbors they did not always like. He did not reserve his deepest teachings for monks alone. He sat with merchants and farmers and grieving mothers and curious kings, and he told all of them the same essential thing. The peace you are looking for is not in a different life, it is in a different relationship with the life you already have. That is the premise of what Buddhism calls the trained mind, and training the mind is not what most people picture when they hear those words. It is not about becoming emotionless. It is not about floating above reality in some detached philosophical cloud. It is about developing the capacity to be fully present with whatever is happening without being completely consumed by it. Think of it like learning to swim. A person who cannot swim is at the mercy of the water. Every wave is a threat, every current is a danger. But a person who knows how to swim moves through the same water with an entirely different relationship to it. The water has not changed, the danger has not disappeared, but the swimmer has a skill that transforms the experience completely. The Buddhist word for this trained quality of mind is upekkha. It is usually translated as equanimity, but equanimity sounds cold and distant in English. It sounds like not caring. Upekkha is actually the opposite of not caring. It is caring deeply while remaining unshaken. It is being fully present with pain without being destroyed by it. It is the most mature emotional capacity a human being can develop, and almost nobody talks about it in those terms. There was a teacher named Ajahn Chah who spent decades in the forests of Thailand teaching monks and laypeople alike. A student once came to him completely broken by grief, and Ajahn Chah picked up a glass and said, "This glass is already broken. Every moment I use it, I enjoy it. I drink from it, I admire it, and when it slips and shatters, I say, of course, it was already broken." The student sat with that for a long time, because what Ajahn Chah was describing was not pessimism. It was a kind of fierce, grateful presence that becomes possible only when you stop pretending that things will last forever. That is the mind that smiles even in pain, not a mind in denial, not a mind performing okayness for an audience, a mind that has made a genuine peace with the nature of things and found that peace to be not empty, but extraordinarily full. Now here is the part that modern neuroscience finds fascinating. The brain of a long-term meditator is measurably different from the brain of someone who has never meditated. The areas associated with self-referential worry, the parts that replay old conversations and catastrophize future events, are quieter, not absent, quieter. And the areas associated with presence and compassion and emotional regulation are more active and more connected. The monk in that small room is not running from his thoughts. He has simply stopped being automatically dragged by them. And that gap between the thought and the being dragged by the thought is everything. That gap is where the smile lives. That gap is where a human being actually gets to choose something. Buddhism has a teaching that describes how suffering propagates through the mind. It begins with a sensation. Then a feeling tone arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Then the mind reacts. It grasps at pleasant, it pushes away unpleasant, it ignores neutral. And from that reaction, the entire chain of craving and aversion and the suffering that follows is born. But there is a door in that chain, a small and easily missed door. It sits between the feeling tone and the reaction, and with enough practice, a person can learn to stand in that doorway, not to stop the feelings, not to override the natural responses of being human, but to pause long enough to choose a response rather than being hijacked by a reaction. That pause is the entire practice. Everything in Buddhist meditation is ultimately about developing the capacity for that pause. The breath is a tool for the pause. The body scan is a tool for the pause. The careful observation of thoughts arising and passing is a tool for the pause. The goal is never to empty the mind. The goal is to stop being at the mercy of it. And what lives in that pause? This is the part that surprises people. What lives in the pause is not blankness. It is not nothingness. What lives there is an awareness that is naturally quiet, naturally clear, naturally at ease. The Buddha called this Buddha nature, the innate luminosity of the mind before all the conditioning lands on it. It is the same thing a child has before they learn to carry yesterday. It is the same lightness that appears in adults sometimes in unexpected moments, at the edge of a lake at dawn, in the middle of genuine laughter, in that strange, peaceful clarity that sometimes arrives right after crying. Those are not accidents. Those are brief, unguarded moments when the conditioning lets go for just a second, and what is underneath shows through. The practice is simply learning to access that on purpose, with intention, in ordinary moments, not just at lakesides at dawn, but in traffic, in difficult conversations, in the middle of a workday that is not going well, in the quiet moments of 3 a.m. when the mind wants to run its usual anxious loops. Pain is not the enemy in this framework. Pain is a signal. Like all signals, it carries information, and then it is finished. The problem is not the signal. The problem is the story that gets built around the signal. The "this always happens to me," the "why is my life like this," the "I will never feel okay again." That story is where the real suffering lives, and that story is optional.
A mind that has been trained even a little, even imperfectly, even inconsistently, begins to notice the story being constructed in real time. And that noticing is itself a kind of freedom, because you cannot be fully trapped by something you can observe. The observer is never identical to the observed. And in that distinction, however thin, however fragile, there is space, real space, breathable space. The monk in that room is not someone who stopped feeling. He is someone who stopped being afraid of feeling, and that is an entirely different thing. That is the difference between a person who smiles because everything is fine, and a person who smiles because they have found something in themselves that does not depend on everything being fine. That smile does not break when the glass does, because it was never resting on the glass to begin with. Small habits that bring your smile back. Nobody fixes a broken life in a single afternoon. That is not pessimism. That is just the honest shape of how change actually works. People hear a powerful idea and they feel it land somewhere deep and real. And then 3 days later, they are back inside the same patterns, the same reactions, the same quiet heaviness that the idea was supposed to dissolve. Not because they are weak, but because insight and transformation are two completely different things. Insight is the lightning. Transformation is the slow, patient work of rebuilding after the storm. Buddhism understood this with remarkable precision.
The Buddha never asked anyone to be immediately enlightened. He asked them to practice. That word practice contains everything. It implies repetition. It implies imperfection. It implies showing up on days when nothing seems to be working and doing the thing anyway. It implies that the path is not a single dramatic leap, but 10,000 small, unremarkable steps in a direction that matters. And what are those steps? What does the actual daily work look like when stripped of the robes and the incense and the language that can sometimes make ancient wisdom feel like it belongs to someone else's life? It starts with something so simple that most people dismiss it before they even try it. It starts with waking up, and before the phone is touched, before the day begins its loud assault, taking 3 conscious breaths. Not meditation, not a ritual, just 3 breaths, where the only job is to actually feel the breath, to notice the chest rising, to notice the air moving, to be here for 10 seconds before the world pulls attention in 17 directions. That sounds almost insultingly small, and yet the entire architecture of Buddhist practice is built on exactly that foundation: the capacity to return, to come back, to notice that the mind has wandered into yesterday or tomorrow, and to gently, without drama, without self-criticism, bring it back to now. That capacity does not grow from dramatic gestures. It grows from small, consistent returns. 1,000 small returns until returning becomes natural, until presence becomes the default rather than the exception. The Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh spent his life translating ancient practice into the texture of ordinary modern living. He talked about washing dishes as a practice, not as a chore to be endured while thinking about something else, but as a complete act. Warm water, the weight of the bowl, the smell of the soap. He was not being poetic. He was describing something precise. Every ordinary moment approached with full attention is a moment of practice, and every moment of practice is a small deposit into something that eventually changes everything. There is a habit so underestimated in modern wellness culture that it almost never appears on productivity lists or morning routine videos. It is the habit of noticing beauty, not manufacturing it, not performing gratitude, simply training the eyes and the attention to register what is already present and usually ignored. The quality of light in a room in early morning, the way a conversation with someone genuine leaves a specific warmth in the chest, the small, unreasonable satisfaction of a meal eaten slittily without distraction. Buddhism calls this sati, mindful attention, and its relationship to the smile is direct and physiological, not just philosophical. A mind that is trained to notice the good that is already present does not need to chase the good that is always slightly out of reach. That shift alone, from chasing to noticing, fundamentally rewires the emotional experience of an ordinary day. Then there is the habit of the body, which Buddhism never separated from the habit of the mind because they were never actually separate. How a person holds themselves physically, the shoulders, the jaw, the place between the eyes where tension collects without announcement, these are not just consequences of the inner state, they are also causes. The body is not a vehicle for the mind. It is an equal partner in the conversation about how a person feels on any given day. The practice of body awareness, simply checking in with where tension lives and allowing it without demanding it leave immediately, is one of the most quietly powerful things a person can do in the middle of an ordinary workday. 2 minutes, no special position required, just attention moving through the body like a slow wave, noticing what is there. That practice over time creates a kind of physical fluency. A person begins to catch tension early, before it becomes a headache, before it becomes an outburst, before it becomes 3 days of low mood with no apparent cause. Here is a habit that Buddhism specifically prescribes and that research consistently supports: generosity. Not the grand performative kind, the quiet kind, the kind that costs something small and gives something real. Letting someone go ahead, listening fully to someone without planning the response, doing a small thing for someone without needing them to notice. These acts do something measurable to the nervous system of the person performing them.
They interrupt the loop of self-focus that is almost always running underneath chronic unhappiness. The self that is constantly tending to itself is an exhausted self. The mind that is always managing its own image is a mind with no room for joy. Generosity is the deliberate interruption of that loop. It turns the attention outward for a moment, and in that turning, something loosens. Something that was gripping lets go briefly, and in that brief letting go, there is space, actual breathing room, and from breathing room comes the smile that has no particular reason. There is also the deeply underrated practice of honest speech. Not brutal honesty, not the kind that uses truth as a weapon, but the practice of gradually reducing the small, comfortable lies that accumulate in a life. The "I am fine" when the reality is more complicated. The agreement given to avoid conflict when disagreement would be more real. The enthusiasm performed for something that actually drains. Every one of those small dishonestries costs something. They cost presence. They cost authenticity. They cost the effortless ease that comes from being the same person in every room. Buddhism places right speech at the very center of its ethical path for exactly this reason. Not because lying is morally catastrophic in every instance, but because a person who is consistently honest with themselves and with others is a person with nothing to manage, no versions to maintain, no performances to sustain. And that freedom, the freedom of the person who is simply and completely what they are, is one of the lightest feelings available to a human being. Now, here is the habit that nobody wants to practice, but everyone needs. Sitting with discomfort without immediately escaping it. Not wallowing, not dramatizing, simply allowing an uncomfortable feeling to be present without reaching for the phone, the snack, the distraction, the very reasonable explanation for why this feeling should not be here. The Buddhist practice of sitting with what is difficult is not masochism. It is the recognition that avoided feelings do not dissolve. They compress, they go underground, they find other exits, and usually those exits are less healthy than simply sitting with the original discomfort would have been. A person who can stay with a difficult feeling for 5 minutes without running is developing something profound. They are learning that they are larger than their feelings, that the feelings move through them without requiring emergency response. And a person who knows that is genuinely unafraid in a way that most people are not. There is also the practice of beginning again, which Buddhism treats not as defeat, but as the whole point. Every time a person notices they have fallen back into old patterns, every time the automatic reactions win for a day or a week or a month, the practice is simply to begin again, without drama, without excessive self-criticism, without the narrative that this means they are not progressing. The mind that can begin again without self-punishment is a mind that has understood something essential, that the path is not linear, that 2 steps forward and 1 step back is still progress, that the falling is part of the practice, not evidence against it, that compassion toward oneself is not a soft indulgence, but a radical and necessary act of honesty.
Because here is what the Buddha noticed and what every serious practitioner eventually confirms. The same voice that criticizes others without mercy also criticizes the self without mercy. And a mind at war with itself cannot smile with its whole face. It can manage a smile, it can produce one on demand. But the real one, the one that reaches the eyes and stays there without effort, that one requires a certain peace treaty with the imperfect, complicated human being that a person actually is. Small habits are not small because they lack power. They are small because that is the only size that fits inside a real life. A real life with a job and relationships and a body that gets tired and a mind that sometimes refuses to cooperate. Into that real life, the grand transformative gesture does not fit. But 3 conscious breaths do. Noticing beauty does. Beginning again does. Being honest does. Sitting with discomfort for 5 minutes does. And over time, those small things compound in the same way that small debts compound or small investments compound. Slowly and then all at once. Until one ordinary morning, a person picks up their coffee and looks out a window and realizes with quiet surprise that something feels different. Not perfect, not fixed, different. Lighter, more spacious, more like themselves. That morning is not the destination. That morning is just the first time they notice they have been walking in the right direction for longer than they realized. Letting go, the Buddhist secret to inner peace. There is a trap that almost every thoughtful person falls into at some point in their life. They read enough, they reflect enough, they understand enough about their patterns and their wounds and the reasons behind their behavior. They can explain their unhappiness with impressive clarity. They know exactly why they are the way they are. And yet, nothing changes. The understanding sits there, complete and useless, like a map that never gets unfolded. And the person remains exactly where they were, just slightly more articulate about it. Buddhism has a specific diagnosis for this condition, and it is not flattering. It says that intellectual understanding without actual release is just a more sophisticated form of holding on. That a person who understands their attachment is still attached. That knowing the name of the cage does not open the door. Letting go is perhaps the most misunderstood instruction in all of spiritual teaching. People hear it and they try to do it. They decide to let go. They announce to themselves that they are letting go. They perform the releasing, and then they check to see if the thing is gone yet. And it is not. Because what they have actually done is try to grip the letting go itself, which is exactly the problem wearing a different coat. The Buddha did not teach letting go as an act of will. He taught it as a natural consequence of seeing clearly. When a person truly and completely understands the nature of what they are holding, the holding simply becomes impossible to sustain. Not because they forced themselves to release it, but because the seeing itself dissolves the logic that made the holding feel necessary. Think about this carefully. People hold on to things for a reason, always. Nobody grips something without believing on some level that the gripping is protecting them. The anger held towards someone who caused pain feels like protection against being hurt again. The identity built around past suffering feels like an explanation for present difficulty. The story of being wronged feels like justice in the absence of actual justice. The holding always has a function, and until that function is seen clearly and honestly, the holding will continue regardless of how many times a person tells themselves to let go. There is a teaching in Buddhism about a monk who carries a heavy stone up a mountain. Someone asks him why he is carrying it. He says, "It gives me strength." The person asking says, "But it is slowing you down and hurting your back." The monk says, "Yes, but I have carried it so long I'm afraid of who I would be without it." That stone is not always dramatic. Sometimes the stone is an old resentment toward a parent. Sometimes it is a version of yourself that you failed to become. Sometimes it's a relationship that ended years ago but still runs quietly in the background of every new one. Sometimes it's a belief about what you deserve that was handed to you so early you cannot remember receiving it. The stone is whatever a person reaches for when they need to explain why they cannot move more freely through their life.
Buddhism points to something called upadana. It is the Pali word for clinging or grasping, and it describes not just the clinging to pleasant things, but the clinging to views, to identities, to rules about how life should work, to the self-concept itself. Upadana is the root from which enormous suffering quietly grows, And the reason it is so difficult to address is that most of what a person clings to does not feel like clinging. It feels like just the way things are. It feels like reality. The person who clings to the belief that they are fundamentally unlovable does not experience it as a clinging, they experience it as a fact. The person who has organized their entire life around being in control does not feel the grip, they feel the necessity. The person who has never processed a specific grief does not notice they are carrying it, they just notice they feel heavy in ways they cannot fully explain. Seeing these things clearly is not comfortable work. Buddhism has never pretended otherwise. The teacher, Pema Chodron, describes the moment of genuine seeing as the moment when the ground falls away. Not a pleasant sensation, but an honest one. And from that groundlessness, if a person can stay with it rather than immediately reaching for something solid, something genuinely new becomes possible. Now here is where the teaching on letting go becomes surprisingly practical and almost counterintuitive. Buddhism does not say release your feelings, it says feel them completely. There is a profound difference. The person who tries to let go by not feeling is suppressing. The person who lets go through complete feeling is processing, and only the second one actually works. When grief is felt fully, without story, without drama, just the raw physical sensation of it, it moves. It has a beginning and a progression and an end, like weather. The mistake most people make with difficult emotions is they either suppress them entirely or they feed them with narrative. Neither allows the emotion to complete its natural arc. Buddhism teaches a middle path even in the feeling of feelings. Be present with the sensation without building a story on top of it. This is why meditation is so central to the practice of letting go. Not because sitting quietly is inherently magical, but because sitting quietly creates the conditions in which a person can finally feel what they have been too busy or too afraid to feel. The feelings that were compressed underground by the constant noise of daily life begin to surface. And if a person can sit with them rather than immediately escaping, those feelings process, they complete, they release on their own without requiring force. The Zen tradition has a saying that describes this process beautifully. It says, "The only way out is through, not around, not above, not by waiting long enough for the feeling to give up and go away. Through, directly through the middle of whatever is there." There is something else that Buddhism teaches about letting go that rarely appears in popular discussions. It teaches that the self that is doing the letting go is itself something that can be released. This sounds abstract until it becomes personal. Most suffering has the self at the center of it. Something happened to me. I am not okay. I deserve better. Why does this always happen to me? The self is always in the story as the protagonist. Buddhist practice gradually loosens the rigidity of that self-concept, not by destroying the self, but by revealing that what most people think of as a fixed, permanent self is actually a flowing collection of changing experiences, perceptions, memories, and reactions. There is no solid, unchanging you that is being permanently damaged by events. There is a process, a river rather than a stone. And a river does not need to let go of the water it held last Tuesday because it was never holding it in the first place. When a person begins to experience even occasionally the fluid nature of the self, the weight of personal history becomes lighter, not because the history is denied or forgotten, but because the one who carries it is less solid than it seemed, and lighter carriers carry things more lightly. There is a practical gateway into this that does not require years of meditation. It is the simple practice of asking in a difficult moment, who is this happening to? Not rhetorically, actually looking, actually investigating what the self is that is currently suffering. When examined closely, the self tends to become less of a solid victim and more of a process, and processes can change in ways that solid things cannot. Letting go does not mean not caring. This is perhaps the most important clarification Buddhism offers on this topic. A person can care deeply and hold lightly. They're not opposites. In fact, the deepest caring often requires the lightest holding. A parent who clings to a child out of fear does not love more freely than a parent who holds that child with open hands. The open-handed parent is not less invested. They are more trusting, more present, more capable of actually seeing the child rather than the fear. That open-handed relationship with life is what the Buddhist path is ultimately pointing toward. Not indifference, not detachment in the cold clinical sense, but a warm and clear-eyed presence with what is actually here, combined with the wisdom to know that nothing being held right now will be in these hands forever. And rather than making that terrifying, the practice makes it beautiful, because it means that every moment is complete in itself. Nothing needs to be hoarded, nothing needs to be gripped until the knuckles whiten. The smile that comes from a person who has genuinely released something they were carrying for years is one of the most recognizable things in the world. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is unmistakably real. It has weight behind it. It has history behind it. It is the smile of someone who knows exactly what they put down and exactly how long they were carrying it. That smile is not an achievement. It is not a reward. It is what was always there underneath the weight, patient, quiet, completely intact, waiting for the hands to open. When the world breaks you, smile anyway. There is a kind of suffering that philosophy cannot reach. Not the everyday friction of wanting things to be different, not the low hum of ordinary dissatisfaction that most people carry without noticing, but the specific, particular devastation of a life genuinely broken, the loss of someone irreplaceable, the betrayal that restructures how a person sees everything that came before it, the illness that arrives without warning and rewrites every plan ever made, the failure that costs not just the effort, but the identity that was built around the effort succeeding. When that kind of suffering arrives, and for most people at some point it does, the gentle advice about morning breathing and noticing beauty and beginning again can feel almost offensive, like being handed a bandage for a wound that goes all the way to the bone. And this is the exact point where many people quietly walk away from spiritual teaching because the teaching felt adequate for the small things, but inadequate for the real ones. Buddhism does not flinch here. This is actually where it becomes most honest and most useful. And the place to begin is with a man named Milarepa, who is considered one of the greatest practitioners in Tibetan Buddhist history. Before he was a teacher, he was something else entirely. He practiced dark magic. He caused the deaths of multiple people in an act of revenge. He carried guilt so heavy and so complete that by his own account he saw no reason to believe redemption was possible for someone who had done what he had done. He did not bypass the guilt. He did not reframe it into a lesson. He did not arrive at peace through the convenient forgetting of what he had been. He went directly into it. He sat with the full weight of what he had caused. He allowed it to be as bad as it actually was. And from that willingness to face the worst of himself without looking away, something completely unexpected emerged. Not absolution handed down from above, but a clarity, a rootedness, a capacity for compassion so vast that it could only have grown from the soil of genuine darkness faced without escape. That is not an accident, and it is not a coincidence. Buddhism consistently teaches that the people who develop the deepest peace are rarely the ones who had the easiest paths. They are the ones who had genuine reasons to be broken and chose something else. Not through denial, not through spiritual performance, but through a specific kind of courage that looks like surrender but is actually its opposite. The concept that holds this is called bodhicitta. It is one of the most significant words in all of Mahayana Buddhism and translates roughly as awakening heart or enlightenment mind. But the translation does not carry the full weight of what it actually means. Bodhicitta is the decision made in the middle of personal suffering to remain open, to not close, to not harden, to not build the walls that suffering naturally encourages a person to build.
Because here is what happens when the world genuinely breaks a person, and they are not equipped for it. The breaking produces a contraction, a very understandable, very human, very self-protective contraction. The person gets smaller, not physically, but energetically. They trust less, they risk less, they hope less. They keep themselves in tighter circles. They build the walls thicker and higher and call it wisdom. And from behind those walls, they are safe. Technically safe, but also completely alone, in a way that gradually becomes its own separate suffering. Bodhicitta is the deliberate choice to stay soft when hardening feels like the only intelligent option. It is not naivete. It is not the reckless openness of someone who has not yet been hurt. It is the radical openness of someone who has been hurt completely and has understood that closing did not actually protect anything worth protecting. Thich Nhat Hanh lived this teaching in a way that removes it entirely from the realm of theory. He was a Vietnamese monk who worked to provide aid to civilians during a war that was tearing his country apart. He was exiled. He watched people he loved die. He lived for decades, unable to return to the country that had formed everything in him. And his response to all of that was not bitterness. It was not hollow positivity. It was a deliberate and daily practice of what he called interbeing. The recognition that his suffering and the suffering of the soldiers causing it and the suffering of the civilians caught between them were not separate things. They were all expressions of the same wound in the same body of humanity. That recognition did not make the pain smaller, but it made the response to the pain different. It turned grief into action. It turned anger into compassion, not by suppressing the anger, but by understanding it deeply enough to see what it was actually pointing toward. There's a Buddhist teaching on what happens in the mind during extreme difficulty that is worth sitting with carefully. It describes two arrows. The first arrow is the actual painful event, the loss, the betrayal, the illness, the failure. The first arrow is real, and the pain it causes is legitimate, and Buddhism does not minimize it. But the second arrow is the one that a person shoots at themselves in response to the first. The why me, the this always happens, the I should have known, the I will never recover from this. The second arrow is optional, and it is almost always the second arrow that does the more lasting damage. The practice during genuine breaking is not to pretend the first arrow did not land. It is to notice the hand reaching for the second one, to pause there, to feel the impulse to compound the pain with story and self-judgment and catastrophe, and to ask honestly whether that second arrow is actually required right now. Sometimes it is such an automatic movement that a person does not even notice they are doing it. The event happens and the self-inflicted suffering follows so immediately that they feel like one thing. The practice is learning to feel the gap between them, even when the gap is very small. There is also something that Buddhism teaches about the particular quality of pain that arrives when a person loses something they loved. The teaching is unexpected, and initially it sounds wrong. It says that the depth of grief is not evidence that love has been defeated. It is evidence that love was real. The grief is the love with nowhere to go. And a person who can hold that understanding inside their loss is experiencing something that is simultaneously devastating and sacred. That reframe is not comfort in the shallow sense. It does not make the loss smaller, but it restores a dignity to the feeling. It takes what could become only bitterness and keeps it connected to its source, which is something genuinely good that was genuinely real. And staying connected to that goodness, even while feeling the loss of it, is one of the most profound acts of inner preservation available to a human being. The Zen tradition has a practice called beginning again that appears in Part 5 in the context of small daily habits, but it has a much larger application. In the face of genuine devastation, beginning again is not a small act. It is an enormous one. It is the decision made by a person who has every reason not to re-enter life, to try again,
to open again, to care again about something even though caring has already cost them significantly. Buddhism does not promise that this re-entry will be painless. It does not promise that a person will not be broken again. What it offers is something more valuable than safety. It offers the understanding that a person who is genuinely broken and genuinely rebuilt is not weaker than someone who is never broken. They are structurally different. Like a bone that heals stronger at the fracture point, the breaking, properly met, properly felt, properly integrated, produces a resilience that could not have been manufactured any other way. There is a Tibetan concept called Vajra, which means diamond or thunderbolt. It represents the quality of mind that is indestructible, not because nothing can touch it, but because everything touches it, and it remains. Not unchanged, not undamaged, but essentially intact, essentially itself. The Vajra mind is not immune to pain. It is just no longer afraid of being destroyed by pain. And a mind that is not afraid of being destroyed is capable of a quality of engagement with life that a protected mind will never know. The smile that survives genuine breaking is a different quality of smile than the one that was there before. It is quieter. It is less surprised by difficulty. It has lines around it that were not there before, but it is also more honest and more available than the smile it replaced, because it has been tested, because it has earned its own continuity, because it is no longer contingent on things going well. Most people spend enormous energy trying to build a life in which breaking is unlikely. They make careful choices, they manage risk, they keep the variables controlled. And this is understandable because breaking hurts, and the desire to avoid pain is one of the most human things that exists. But the cost of that strategy is sometimes a life so protected that it is also somehow not quite fully lived, not fully felt, not fully available to the depth of experience that is only possible when the walls are genuinely down. Buddhism does not ask anyone to seek suffering. That is a misreading of the teaching. It asks something more nuanced. It asks a person to stop spending all their energy trying to ensure that suffering never arrives, and to spend some of that energy developing the inner resources to meet suffering with something other than collapse when it inevitably does. The world will break everyone eventually. That is not cynicism. That is just the honest shape of a human life fully engaged with other people, with love, with work that matters, with hopes that sometimes fail. The question Buddhism asks is not how to avoid the breaking. It is who will you be inside the breaking? What will you reach for when the floor disappears? What has been built inside that does not require the outside to hold together? And a person who has genuinely asked those questions and found honest answers and done the work that honest answers require carries something in them that is not visible on an ordinary day. But on the day the world breaks them, it becomes visible, quietly, without announcement, in the steadiness of their eyes, in the way they breathe through it, in the faint and completely unreasonable smile that appears, not because everything is fine, but because something in them is simply not afraid anymore. That smile is not performance, it is not denial, it is the most real thing in the room. Your smile is your superpower. There is a moment that happens to certain people, and it is almost impossible to describe to someone who has not experienced it. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no lightning, no voice from above, no single conversation that changes everything. It is quieter than that. It arrives in the middle of something completely ordinary, standing in a kitchen, walking down a familiar street, sitting in a car before going inside somewhere. And in that ordinary moment, something shifts, not outside, inside, a settling, a recognition, a sense of having arrived somewhere that was always there, but somehow never noticed. And from that place, a smile appears, not in response to anything, not because something good just happened, just there, just present, just completely and unreasonably itself. That moment is not the end of the path, but it is the first genuine confirmation that the path is real, that it leads somewhere, that all the small, patient, unglamorous work of turning attention inward was not an elaborate distraction from living, but the most direct route into it. Buddhism calls what is found in that moment by many names: Sukha, Nirvana, Buddha nature, the original face, the unborn mind. The names are many because language circles the thing without ever quite landing on it. But every tradition that points to it agrees on one essential quality. It is not something acquired, it is something recognized. It was never absent, it was only obscured. And the obscuring was never permanent, even when it felt that way for years. The smile that comes from that recognition is not a small thing dressed in humble clothing. It is genuinely one of the most powerful forces available to a human being. And the world is deeply confused about this, because power is usually associated with volume, with force, with the ability to compel or dominate or overwhelm. But the power of the genuine smile operates on an entirely different frequency, quieter, slower, and far more durable than anything that depends on external force to sustain itself. Consider what actually happens when a person who has done genuine inner work walks into a room. Not someone performing happiness, not someone managing their presentation with careful social skill, but someone who has genuinely found something in themselves that does not depend on the room's reaction to them. Something changes in the room. Not dramatically, but measurably. The quality of the space shifts slightly. Other people relax without knowing why. Conversations go deeper than they usually do. The things that were going unsaid find an opening, because genuine peace in one person gives other people permission to be more honest about where they actually are. That is not metaphor. That is the documented behavior of human nervous systems in proximity to one another. A regulated nervous system communicates safety to other nervous systems. A person who is genuinely at ease, not performing ease but actually in it, creates the conditions in which the people around them can also access something more real than their usual surface presentation. The smile in this sense is not just personal, it is relational. It is environmental. It is a contribution to every space it enters. The Buddha understood this, which is why compassion and wisdom are always taught together in Buddhist philosophy. They are not separate virtues. They are two expressions of the same awakened quality. The person who has genuinely seen through the illusions that cause personal suffering has not just liberated themselves, they have also become more genuinely useful to everyone they encounter, because they are no longer too occupied with managing their own anxiety to actually see another person clearly. They can look at suffering in someone else and recognize it without being destabilized by it. They can offer presence rather than just advice, stillness rather than just solutions. And presence is often what is most needed and most rarely offered. There is a teaching that the Dalai Lama returns to consistently across decades of public speaking. He says that his religion is kindness, not Buddhism with all its complexity and richness. Kindness, a single word. And he says it not as a simplification, but as a distillation. Because after all the philosophy and practice and study and sitting, what remains as the most practical daily expression of genuine awakening is the capacity to be kind. Genuinely kind. Not kind as social performance, not kind when it is convenient, but kind as a baseline orientation toward the world and every person in it. That kindness begins with the smile, not the polite smile that manages social distance, the real one. The one that says, I see you, and I am not afraid of what I see, and you do not need to perform anything for me right now. That smile is an act of radical generosity. It gives something to the receiver that is increasingly rare in a world where most interactions are transactional, and most attention is fragmented, and most people feel more observed than actually seen. Now here is something that the entire arc of this video has been building toward, and it is important to say it plainly. The smile is not the goal. It is the indicator. It is not what a person is working toward. It is what appears when the work is genuinely happening.
Chasing the smile directly is like chasing sleep. The harder the chase, the further the destination. But when the conditions are right, when the body is settled and the mind is quiet, and the resistance has been gently released, sleep comes by itself. And the smile is exactly the same. It is what happens when a person stops fighting with their own life. This is why the entire Buddhist path can be understood as the systematic removal of obstacles to what is already naturally present. The meditation is not manufacturing peace, it is removing what disrupts it. The ethical practice is not building virtue from nothing, it is removing the friction that dishonesty creates. The letting go is not forcing release, it is removing the reasoning that makes holding feel necessary. Every practice is a form of clearing, and what is being cleared toward is not some exotic future state. It is the ordinary present moment experienced without the weight of unnecessary resistance.
A person who has genuinely walked this path, even imperfectly, even partially, carries something that other people feel, even when they cannot name it. There is a quality of ease that is different from comfort. Comfort is the absence of difficulty. Ease is the ability to be present with difficulty without being consumed by it. The person who has ease does not have fewer problems than others. They have a different relationship with their problems. They are not identical to their circumstances. And that gap between the person and the circumstances is where the smile quietly lives. There is a final teaching from Buddhism that belongs here, and it comes from the tradition of Zen. A student asks a master what happens after enlightenment. The master says, "Chop wood, carry water." The student is confused. He says, "But that is what happens before enlightenment." And the master says, "Yes, exactly." The smile being discussed throughout this entire video is not the smile of a person who has escaped ordinary life. It is the smile of a person who has returned to ordinary life completely, who chops wood and carries water and does the unremarkable daily things that all lives require, but who does them from a different center, who is genuinely here for them, who brings the whole of themselves to the small and unimpressive moments that make up the vast majority of every human life, and finds, to their own mild astonishment, that the small and unimpressive moments are actually enough, that they were always enough, that the search for something more was itself the thing preventing the recognition of what was already here. Your smile is not a decoration. It is not a social tool. It is not the reward at the end of a good day or a good year or a sufficiently successful life. It is the surface expression of something fundamental in you that has been present since before any of the difficulty arrived. It survived everything that tried to bury it. It will outlast everything that is currently pressing down on it, and it is available right now in this moment, not as a performance and not as a pretense, but as an honest recognition that underneath all the weight of being human, there is something in you that is simply and completely okay. That is not a small thing to know. In fact, it may be the most important thing a person can know. And the knowing of it, the genuine bone-deep knowing rather than the intellectual understanding of it, changes not just how a person feels, but how they move through the world, how they treat the people around them, what they build, what they release, what they finally allow themselves to receive. If this video has landed somewhere real in you, if something in these words has touched something in you that recognized itself, then do not let that recognition sit quietly and fade like most things fade. Write something in the comments below, not a performance, not a polished reflection, just something honest about where you are and what landed. Because the person who reads that comment tomorrow morning might be exactly at the moment where they needed to know that someone else has been here too. That is how wisdom travels, not through algorithms, through honesty, through one person being real enough that another person feels safe enough to be real in return. Like this video if it gave you something. Share it with whoever came to mind while you were watching it, because that thought was not an accident. Subscribe to Wisdom Woven because this is only the beginning of a conversation that this channel exists to keep having. There is more to explore, more to uncover, more to quietly and honestly look at together. And none of it requires you to be further along than you are right now. It only requires you to be exactly where you are and willing to take the next small step from there. The smile you were promised at the beginning of this video is not something that was given to you here. It was already yours. Every word in this video was simply pointing back towards something you already had. Something that was buried, yes. Something that was covered and compressed and temporarily inaccessible, but yours. Always and completely yours. It has been waiting with remarkable patience, and it is still waiting now. Not somewhere else, not in some future version of your life when things are finally sorted. Here, in this ordinary, unremarkable, completely sufficient moment. All it requires is that you stop looking for it somewhere else and simply notice that it was never actually gone.